I never imagined that accepting the worst job in the world would lead me to the best day of my life. But when you're running away from a stepmother who seems to have stepped straight out of a deranged fairy tale, anything sounds like freedom, even milking cows in the middle of nowhere. Breakfast at the Beaumont house always had the atmosphere of a failed peace negotiation. Cordelia Rosewood chewed her whole-grain toast in silence while watching her stepmother, Vivian, gesticulate dramatically with a cup of herbal tea that cost more than minimum wage. "Darling, you simply must understand," Vivian sighed, her perfectly manicured nails drumming on the imported marble table. "I cannot allow you to continue working at that miserable office. What will people think? A Beaumont working as a secretary." The word left her mouth as if it were profanity. Cordelia swallowed the piece of toast that seemed to have turned into sawdust. At 26, she had become an expert at swallowing bitter words along with her morning coffee. "Vivian, I like my job, and I'm not technically a Beaumont." "Don't be ridiculous. You live under the Beaumont roof, you use the Beaumont name. Because my father married you. And therefore you have social responsibilities. Marlborough Whitfield called me yesterday. His son Reginald is returning from Harvard, and would be a perfect match for—" "No." The word came out louder than Cordelia intended. Vivian froze, teacup in midair, with that expression of someone who had just seen a poodle speak French. "Excuse me?" "I said no, Vivian. I won't marry Reginald or any of your harebrained matrimonial schemes." It was at that moment that Cordelia's father, Edmund Beaumont, appeared in the kitchen like a well-dressed ghost, holding the newspaper and emanating that aura of a man who preferred discussing stock options to family problems. "What's all this noise so early?" he murmured without lifting his eyes from the business section. "Your daughter is being impossible," Vivian declared, as if announcing a natural disaster. Edmund finally looked up and rested his tired eyes on Cordelia. For a second she saw a glimpse of the man who used to make heart-shaped pancakes when she was little, but it was just a second. "Cordelia, your stepmother only wants what's best for you. What's best for her, maybe. Don't be ungrateful," he sighed, returning to the newspaper. "Vivian has connections that could open doors for you. Doors I don't want to open." The silence that followed was so thick, it could have been cut with a bread knife. Vivian drummed harder on the table. Edmund turned pages with unnecessarily loud rustling, and Cordelia felt her chest tighten with that familiar sensation of being suffocated by other people's expectations. That's when the phone rang. Edmund answered in his business voice. "Hello? Edmund Beaumont speaking." Yes, Harold. How are you?" His expression gradually changed, going from neutral to curious, then to slightly concerned. I see. It's quite a complicated situation indeed." No, you were right to call." Cordelia exchanged glances with Vivian, who had stopped drumming and was now listening with undisguised attention. "A whole year?" Edmund continued. "And you say you've already tried with how many people? 5? My God." "No, of course it's not cursed, Harold. Don't be ridiculous, although I admit it is peculiar." Now even Vivian was leaning forward. "Well," Edmund sighed heavily, "I really don't know who could—" "Wait." His eyes landed on Cordelia with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Harold, let me call you back in a few minutes, all right? Maybe I have a solution." He hung up and stared at his daughter as if evaluating livestock. "Who was that?" Vivian asked impatiently. "Harold Pembridge. You remember him, dear? We have some land in partnership in the countryside." "Oh yes, that rustic farmer." Edmund ignored his wife's disdainful tone. "He has a serious problem at the farm. He needs someone to manage the property for a year, but everyone he's hired has fled." "Fled?" Cordelia arched an eyebrow. "Well, apparently there are some challenges. The place is very isolated, has no modern amenities, and has some, structural problems." "What kind of structural problems?" Vivian asked suspiciously. "Well, the plumbing is temperamental, the electricity fails occasionally, there are strategic leaks, and—" Edmund cleared his throat. "The neighbor is apparently difficult." Cordelia felt something stir inside her chest. It wasn't quite hope. It was more like a door opening after being closed for a long time. What kind of difficult? Harold didn't go into details, but from what I understood, the man is a bad-tempered hermit who scares away anyone who approaches the property. Vivian let out a little laugh. Sounds like a nightmare. But to Cordelia, it sounded like freedom. How much does it pay? She asked, trying to sound casual. Edmund looked surprised. Why? You're not thinking of... I am. Cordelia. Vivian stood up so abruptly she knocked over her teacup. You can't be serious. Going to a rundown farm in the middle of nowhere with a crazy hermit as a neighbor? It's madness. It's perfect, Cordelia murmured, more to herself than to the others. Edmund studied his daughter's face for a long moment. Cordelia, dear, I know you sometimes feel pressured here at home, but this is very drastic. A whole year? Alone? Dad, she said softly. I'm 26 years old. It's high time I found out who I am away from. All this. She made a vague gesture that encompassed the immaculate kitchen, Vivian's expensive perfume smell, and the entire suffocating life she hadn't chosen. But darling, Vivian tried a more honeyed approach. You have so much potential here. Reginald is a lovely young man, just graduated from Harvard summa cum laude, and... Vivian, Cordelia's voice was calm, but had a firmness she didn't know she possessed. If you mention Reginald Whitfield one more time, I swear I'll accept this job just to make sure he never has to see me again. The silence that followed was broken only by the ping of the microwave, finishing heating Vivian's milk. Edmund scratched his graying beard. Well, if you're really decided, Harold said it pays very well. Apparently he's desperate. How well? Double what you make at the office, plus free housing. Cordelia felt her heart race. With that money, she could finally save enough to become completely independent, maybe even open that little cafe with bookstore she'd always dreamed of. And when does he need an answer? Today. The last person left yesterday morning. Vivian made a sound that was somewhere between a moan and the screech of a wounded owl. Edmund, you can't be encouraging this escape from reality. It's not escape. Cordelia stood up, feeling lighter than she had in months. It's an opportunity. An opportunity for what? To become a peasant? To breathe. The word hung in the air like both confession and challenge. Edmund observed his daughter for a long moment, and Cordelia swore she saw a gleam of pride in his eyes. Well, he said finally, if that's what you want. He picked up the phone. I'll call Harold. Edmund! Vivian practically screamed. Vivian, dear, maybe a little independence will do Cordelia good. A little independence is one thing. This is voluntary exile. Cordelia couldn't suppress a smile. Voluntary exile. I like the sound of that. And while her father dialed Harold Pembridge's number and Vivian began what promised to be an epic lamentation, Cordelia looked out the kitchen window at the perfectly manicured garden and felt, for the first time in years, that she was finally going to discover what it was like to be at home. 3 hours into my new life, I had already been attacked by a territorial rooster, discovered that rustic charm is real estate code for everything is broken, and met my neighbor, who turned out to be the most infuriatingly gorgeous man I'd ever wanted to throttle. The truck that was supposed to take Cordelia to Pembridge Farm looked like it had survived both world wars and possibly the invention of the wheel. Harold Pembridge himself wasn't much more reassuring, a wiry man in his 60s with wild gray hair and the suspicious expression of someone who'd been disappointed by humanity too many times. You sure about this, miss? He asked for the 5th time as they bumped along a dirt road that seemed to have been designed by someone with a personal vendetta against vehicle suspensions. It's not too late to change your mind. I could turn around right now. Cordelia gripped the door handle as they hit another pothole that probably had its own zip code. I'm sure, Mr. Pembridge. Call me Harold. And that's what the last 5 people said. He swerved to avoid what might have been roadkill or might have been a very flat rock. Of course, none of them lasted more than 2 weeks. What exactly made them leave? Harold was quiet for so long that Cordelia wondered if he'd heard her over the truck's death rattles. Finally, he sighed. Well, there was Margaret. Lasted exactly 4 days before she said the house was trying to kill her. Then came that young fellow. What was his name? Timothy? He made it 6 days before claiming the neighbor was some kind of demon spawn. Demon spawn seems excessive. You haven't met him yet. They crested a hill and suddenly Cordelia could see her new home spread out in the valley below. The farmhouse was a sprawling Victorian that had probably been white once upon a time but was now more of a weathered gray. The barn looked like it was held together by stubbornness and prayer, and the entire property was surrounded by rolling green hills that were, admittedly, breathtaking. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Harold glanced at her like she might be having a stroke. "Wait till you meet Napoleon." Napoleon? The rooster. He thinks he owns the place. To be fair, he might. As if summoned, a massive red rooster strutted into view, fixed Cordelia with a stare that could have melted steel, and let out a crow that sounded like a battle cry. "Yep," Harold muttered. "He knows you're here." The truck wheezed to a stop in front of the farmhouse, and Cordelia climbed out, immediately understanding what the previous tenants had meant about the house trying to kill them. The front porch sagged like a disappointed frown. There was a shutter hanging by what looked like sheer determination, and she could swear she heard something scurrying in the walls. "The key's under the third loose floorboard," Harold said, not bothering to get out. "Kitchen faucet only works if you sweet-talk it. The upstairs bathroom door sticks, and whatever you do, don't go in the basement without a flashlight and possibly a priest." That's reassuring. "Grocery delivery comes Tuesdays and Fridays if Boris is feeling generous. That's Boris Kowalski runs the local store. Good man, terrible driver. Phone works most of the time, internet's spotty, and the nearest neighbor is—" A sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by a voice that could have melted chocolate and probably had. "Harold, what fresh hell are you bringing to my doorstep now?" Cordelia turned toward the voice and immediately understood why Timothy had fled after 6 days. Walking toward them across the meadow was quite possibly the most unfairly attractive man she'd ever seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it, and eyes the color of stormy seas. He was wearing worn jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms that belonged in a museum dedicated to the art of manual labor. He was also scowling at them like they'd personally offended his ancestors. "Jasper McBride," Harold muttered under his breath. "Meet your new neighbor. Try not to let him scare you off before sunset." Jasper reached the truck and planted his hands on his hips in a gesture that managed to be both intimidating and somehow deeply appealing. "Please tell me you didn't find another city princess to torture with this place." "I'm standing right here," Cordelia said dryly, climbing out of the truck with as much dignity as she could muster. "And I'm nobody's princess." Jasper's eyes flicked over her, taking in her designer jeans, her carefully styled hair, and her obviously expensive boots, and his expression shifted from annoyed to actively skeptical. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England." He had a slight accent she couldn't place, something warm and rolling that made her think of whiskey and fireplaces. "How long are we betting on this one, Harold?" "I give her 3 days." "That's insulting," Cordelia said, crossing her arms. "I could easily last 4 days." Something flickered in Jasper's eyes, surprise maybe, or amusement. Did she just make a joke? "I make jokes. I also make coffee, pasta that doesn't come from a box, and excellent conversation when I'm not being insulted by grumpy hermits." Harold coughed, but it sounded suspiciously like a laugh. "Well, I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Cordelia, remember what I said about Napoleon. And Jasper, try not to traumatize this one too quickly. I'm running out of people willing to take this job." Before either of them could protest, Harold put the truck in gear and bumped away down the dirt road, leaving them standing in increasingly awkward silence. Jasper was the first to break it. "Cordelia." He said her name like he was testing how it tasted. "Let me guess, Daddy's little girl decided to play farmer for a summer?" "Let me guess," she shot back. "Grumpy loner decided that scaring away innocent people is a valid hobby?" "Innocent?" He laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "Princess, if you're innocent, I'm a ballet dancer." "Well, you do have the legs for it." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she immediately felt her cheeks flame. But Jasper's scowl faltered, replaced by something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Did you just check out my legs?" "I was making an observation about your proportional symmetry." Proportional symmetry. He was definitely fighting a smile now. "That's a new one." "I'm full of surprises." "I'm sure you are." The way he said it made her stomach do something complicated. "Well, Princess Cordelia of the Proportional Symmetry Observations, welcome to paradise." He gestured toward the sagging farmhouse. "Try not to let the house eat you. It's just Cordelia, and I'll do my best not to get consumed by architecture. We'll see." He started to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Princess." "Just Cordelia," she repeated. "When you inevitably flee back to whatever mansion you came from, try not to leave the lights on. The electric bill comes to me." And with that charming parting shot, he strode away across the meadow, leaving Cordelia standing alone with her suitcases, a judgmental rooster, and a house that was definitely plotting something. She looked up at the Victorian's peeling facade and sighed. "Well, house, it's just you and me now. Try to keep the attempted murder to a minimum, okay?" A shutter immediately fell off and crashed to the ground. "I'll take that as a maybe." By hour 12, I had learned 3 important life lessons. Roosters are tiny dinosaurs with anger management issues. Victorian houses have their own vindictive personalities, and my insufferably attractive neighbor had a weakness for chocolate chip cookies that might just be my secret weapon. Cordelia's first night at Pembridge Farm was like being trapped inside a haunted house designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor. The kitchen faucet had indeed required sweet-talking and mild threats. The upstairs bathroom door had gotten stuck with her inside it for 20 mortifying minutes, and something in the walls kept making sounds that were either mice or tiny ghosts with tap shoes. She'd finally fallen asleep around 2 a.m., only to be jolted awake at dawn by Napoleon's triumphant crow directly outside her bedroom window. "Good morning to you too, you feathered alarm clock from hell," she muttered, stumbling to the window. Napoleon strutted below, chest puffed out like he'd just conquered France. Again. By 7 a.m., Cordelia had managed to coax the ancient coffee maker into producing something that was technically coffee, though it tasted like it had been filtered through a sock. She was sitting on the front porch trying to convince herself that this was all part of the adventure, when she spotted Jasper McBride emerging from the barn across the meadow. Even from a distance, the man was unfairly photogenic. He moved with the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing exactly what he was doing, and the morning sunlight caught in his dark hair in a way that was frankly offensive to her peace of mind. He glanced toward her house, caught sight of her on the porch, and, to her complete surprise, raised a hand in what might have been a greeting, or possibly a warning. With Jasper, it was hard to tell. Feeling charitable, and possibly still coffee-deprived, Cordelia waved back. Big mistake. Apparently, this was the signal Napoleon had been waiting for. The rooster launched himself off the porch railing with the battle cry of a tiny feathered Viking and made a beeline straight for Jasper. "Oh no," Cordelia breathed, watching in horror as the rooster attacked her neighbor's ankles with the fury of a bird who'd clearly been planning this assault all night. Jasper, to his credit, didn't scream. He did, however, begin what could only be described as an interpretive dance involving high steps, creative swearing, and increasingly desperate attempts to shoo away a bird that was apparently impervious to reason. "Napoleon!" Cordelia called, jumping up from her chair. "Bad rooster!" This only seemed to encourage Napoleon, who redoubled his efforts and managed to back Jasper against the barn door. Without thinking, Cordelia grabbed the first thing she could find, which happened to be a wooden spoon, and ran across the meadow in her pajamas and bare feet because apparently this was her life now. "Get away from him, you psychotic poultry." She arrived brandishing the spoon like a tiny sword, placing herself between Jasper and his feathered attacker. Napoleon fixed her with a look of profound betrayal, ruffled his feathers indignantly, and strutted away with the air of a general whose battle plans had been rudely interrupted. Cordelia turned to find Jasper staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. His hair was disheveled. There were tiny tears in his jeans where Napoleon had made contact, and he was breathing like he'd just run a marathon. "You," he said finally, "just saved me from a rooster." "I just saved a rooster from you," she corrected. "Napoleon's protective of the farm. He probably thought you were threatening something. I was getting tools from my own barn." "Well, Napoleon doesn't know that. He's very territorial." Jasper looked down at her. Barefoot in pajamas covered with tiny coffee cups, wielding a wooden spoon, with her hair escaping from its braid in every direction. And something shifted in his expression. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd stay on the porch and scream for help." "I don't scream for help. I grab wooden spoons and charge headfirst into poultry conflicts like any reasonable person." That earned her something that was almost a smile. "Reasonable, right?" An awkward silence stretched between them, broken only by Napoleon's distant, disgruntled clucking. "I should—" Jasper gestured vaguely toward the barn. "Right. And I should—" Cordelia looked down at her pajamas and bare feet. "Put on actual clothes before I start my day." But neither of them moved. "Thank you," Jasper said suddenly. "For the rescue." "You're welcome. Though I think Napoleon was winning." "Definitely." He paused, then added, "If you need anything, tools, advice on dealing with the house, I'm usually in the workshop behind the barn." It was an olive branch, tiny and carefully offered, and Cordelia felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "Actually," she said before she could stop herself, "I don't suppose you know anything about temperamental coffee makers." "What's it doing?" "Producing liquid that I think might technically qualify as coffee, but tastes like punishment." This time he definitely smiled. "You're probably using too much water. Those old percolators are finicky." "Would you—" She took a breath. "Would you like to show me? I make excellent chocolate chip cookies as payment." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. "You bake?" "I bake, I cook. I even do laundry that doesn't turn everything pink. I'm full of hidden talents." "I'm beginning to see that." The way he said it made her stomach do that complicated thing again. "So," she said, trying to sound casual, "coffee lesson?" He hesitated for so long she was sure he'd say no. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. "But I want to see these allegedly excellent cookies first." "Deal. Give me 20 minutes to become presentable and I'll prove my baking credentials." 20 minutes, he agreed, then headed toward the barn, calling over his shoulder, "And Princess, next time you want to play Rooster Whisperer, maybe wear shoes." Cordelia looked down at her dirt-covered feet and grinned. Noted. As she walked back to the house, she could have sworn she heard him laugh. 30 minutes later, Jasper appeared at her back door with the suspicious expression of a man who'd been disappointed by too many promises. The suspicion faded considerably when she handed him a plate of still warm cookies. He bit into one, chewed thoughtfully, and his expression shifted to something that might have been reverence. "Okay," he said finally. "These are—" He paused, took another bite. "How?" "Secret ingredient." "Which is?" "If I told you, it wouldn't be secret anymore." He studied her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You're not what I expected at all." "So you've mentioned. What did you expect?" "Someone who'd last 3 days and leave crying." "The day is young," she said cheerfully. "I might still surprise you." "Something tells me," Jasper said, reaching for another cookie, "you're going to do exactly that. There's something dangerously intimate about watching a man fix your coffee maker while you pretend not to notice how his forearms move when he works. Add rain, forced proximity, and the kind of conversation that makes you forget why you were guarding your heart in the first place, and you've got a recipe for trouble." The coffee lesson began innocently enough. Jasper showed up with a toolbox and that guarded expression he wore like armor, while Cordelia tried to act like having the most attractive man in 3 counties standing in her kitchen was a perfectly normal Tuesday morning occurrence. The problem, Jasper explained, unscrewing the base of the ancient percolator, is that these old machines need respect. You can't just dump water in and hope for the best. I don't dump, Cordelia protested from where she was leaning against the counter, definitely not staring at the way his hands moved with confident precision. I pour with intention. Uh-huh. He glanced up at her with those storm-gray eyes. And how much intention were you using yesterday? A reasonable amount? Princess, there's coffee grounds welded to the inside of this thing. This is what happens when you show no mercy to vintage equipment. Stop calling me princess. And I thought coffee was supposed to be foolproof. Nothing's foolproof. Everything requires patience, attention. He paused, meeting her eyes. Care. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with more meaning than a discussion about coffee makers should reasonably contain. Right, Cordelia said, her voice coming out slightly breathless. Care. I can do care. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe, or something deeper. We'll see. For the next 20 minutes, Jasper patiently walked her through the proper coffee-making ritual, standing close enough that she could catch hints of his scent, something woodsy and clean, with undertones of honest work and morning air. Every time he leaned over to adjust something, her heart did little acrobatic routines that had nothing to do with caffeine withdrawal. Now, he said, stepping back as the percolator began its happy bubbling. We wait. That's it? All that ceremony for waiting? The best things require patience. Says the man who nearly declared war on my rooster yesterday. Napoleon started it. I was merely defending myself. With interpretive dance. That wasn't interpretive dance. That was tactical evasion. Is that what we're calling it? Cordelia grinned. Because it looked suspiciously like... A tremendous crash of thunder cut her off, followed immediately by the sound of rain attacking the roof like an army of tiny hammers. The kitchen lights flickered ominously. Well, Jasper said, glancing toward the window where rain was already creating rivers down the glass. Looks like I'm not going anywhere for a while. The electricity's not going to hold, is it? As if summoned by her words, the lights flickered once more and died, plunging them into the gray half-light of the storm. Probably not, Jasper said calmly. Do you have candles? Somewhere. I think I saw some in... Cordelia started toward what she hoped was a utility closet, promptly walked into a chair, and stumbled backward directly into Jasper's chest. His hands came up automatically to steady her, and suddenly she was pressed against him, his arms around her waist, his face inches from hers in the storm-dimmed kitchen. Time seemed to suspend itself. Hi, she whispered, acutely aware of how solid and warm he felt, how her hands had somehow ended up flat against his chest. Hi yourself, he murmured, and his voice had gone rough around the edges. They stayed like that for a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3, and then Jasper stepped back like he'd been burned. Candles, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Right. I think I saw some in the dining room. While Jasper hunted for candles, Cordelia tried to convince her pulse to return to normal and reminded herself that she was supposed to be finding independence, not getting tangled up with complicated neighbors who smelled like heaven and made her forget her own name. By the time he returned with an armload of pillar candles, she'd managed to pour the coffee, which was admittedly the best she'd ever tasted, and was sitting at the kitchen table trying to look composed. Much better, Jasper said, settling across from her as warm candlelight flickered between them. You might actually survive out here. Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence. I'm serious. Most people would be panicking about the power outage. Should I be panicking? Because I can work up some panic if it's expected. He smiled, a real smile this time, not the careful half version she'd been getting. No panic required. The power comes back eventually. Always does. And until then, we waited out. Something in his tone made her study his face in the candlelight. You don't mind being stuck here? Should I mind? Most people would find this inconvenient. Being trapped with a stranger in a house that's probably older than indoor plumbing. You're not exactly a stranger anymore. You've saved me from Napoleon. fed me cookies that are probably illegal in 12 states, and now you make coffee that doesn't taste like liquid punishment." He paused, then added quietly, "Besides, I don't mind the company." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. "Even though I'm a spoiled city princess?" "You're not what I thought you were," he said, meeting her eyes. "Not even close. What did you think I was?" "Someone temporary. Someone who'd run back to Daddy the first time things got difficult. And now?" Jasper was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the golden light. "Now I think maybe you're tougher than you look. Maybe you're here for reasons that matter to you. Maybe I am. Want to tell me what they are?" It was Cordelia's turn to hesitate. Something about the storm, the candlelight, the surprising gentleness in his voice made her want to spill everything. Vivian's suffocating expectations, her father's disappointment, the feeling of being trapped in a life that belonged to someone else. Instead, she said, "Maybe I just wanted to find out who I am when nobody's watching." "And any discovery so far?" She looked around the flickering kitchen, thought about the past few days, the independence, the challenges, the unexpected pleasure of her own company, the way this infuriating man across from her made her feel alive in ways she hadn't expected. "I'm discovering I'm braver than I thought," she said finally. "And possibly more stubborn." "Definitely more stubborn," Jasper agreed. Anyone else would have fled after the Napoleon incident. Anyone else wouldn't have chocolate chip cookies as backup. True, those cookies are a secret weapon. Thunder crashed overhead again, and the candles flickered but held. In the dancing light, Jasper's face was all angles and shadows, and Cordelia found herself thinking that being stranded in a storm had never looked quite so appealing. "So," she said, settling back in her chair, "since we're stuck here anyway, want to tell me why you live like a hermit and terrorize innocent farm managers?" Jasper's smile faded slightly. "Who says I terrorize anyone? Harold, Timothy, Margaret. Should I go on?" "Maybe," he said carefully. "I just value my privacy. Or maybe you're hiding something." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and immediately she saw his walls slam back up. "Everyone's hiding something, Princess," he said, his voice cooling. "Even you." And just like that, the moment was gone, leaving them sitting across from each other in the candlelight like polite strangers again, with the storm raging outside and something much more complicated brewing between them. I learned that morning that there are exactly 3 things that can make a grown woman question all her life choices: a flooded basement, a missing neighbor who might be in serious trouble, and the discovery that the grumpy hermit next door is actually a world-famous artist who's been hiding from something bigger than a bad review. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a world that sparkled with raindrops and the kind of crisp air that made everything feel possible. Cordelia woke to find that the power had returned sometime during the night, along with a note tucked under her coffee mug that simply read, "Thanks for the company. Jay." She was still smiling at the note when she heard the sound of rushing water coming from somewhere it definitely shouldn't be coming from. "Please don't be the basement," she muttered, following the sound downstairs. "Please be literally anything except the basement." It was the basement. Water cascaded down the stone steps like a small, very determined waterfall, and the entire lower level had transformed into what could generously be called an indoor lake. In the middle of this disaster, Napoleon stood on an overturned bucket, looking supremely offended by the entire situation. "Well," Cordelia said to the rooster, "this is not ideal." Napoleon squawked in agreement. 20 minutes later, she was standing in 3 inches of murky water, wielding a mop like it was Excalibur, when she heard footsteps on the stairs. "Princess?" Jasper's voice echoed down. "What's all the—" He appeared at the bottom of the stairs and stopped short. "Holy hell. Language, McBride, there's a rooster present." "How did this happen?" "I think the storm overwhelmed something called a sump pump, which I'm learning is apparently crucial to not having an indoor swimming pool." Jasper waded into the water, and Cordelia tried not to notice how the morning light from the small basement window caught in his hair, or how competent he looked as he immediately began assessing the situation. "The good news," he said after a few minutes of poking around, "is that this is fixable. The bad news is it's going to take most of the day. Most of the day that I'm supposed to be figuring out how to run a farm. The farm will wait. This won't." He looked at her standing there with her mop and soaked shoes, and something soft crossed his face. "Besides, you're not doing this alone. Jasper, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." He said it with such quiet certainty that she didn't argue. For the next several hours, they worked side by side, pumping water, moving damaged items, and coaxing the ancient sump pump back to life. Somewhere between rescuing a box of old photographs and arguing about the best way to wring out a vintage rug, the careful distance they'd maintained began to dissolve. "So," Cordelia said, taking a break to tie her hair back, "what exactly do you do when you're not rescuing damsels from flooded basements?" Jasper went very still. "What makes you think I do anything?" "Well, you have to make a living somehow. And you're clearly not farming. Maybe I'm independently wealthy." "Are you?" "No." "Then what?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I used to paint." "Used to?" "Long story. We've got time, unless you have somewhere urgent to be." Jasper looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. "What would you say if I told you I was famous?" Cordelia blinked. "Famous for what? Hermit lifestyle consulting?" "For painting. My work used to hang in galleries in New York, London, Paris." His voice was carefully neutral. "People paid ridiculous amounts of money for my paintings." "Used to? Until I had what the art world politely calls a creative breakdown, and what I call finally seeing through the bullshit." He dragged a hand through his hair. "Turns out when you tell the most powerful gallery owner in Manhattan that his taste is pretentious garbage and his clients are vapid sheep, your career tends to take a hit." Cordelia stared at him. "You're Jasper McBride." "The Jasper McBride. The one who disappeared 3 years ago after that whole scandal with—" "Marina Ashworth, yes. My ex-fiancée who happened to be sleeping with my gallery owner while planning our wedding and selling my work behind my back." His smile was bitter. "Quite the trifecta of betrayal." "Oh my God, I remember that story. The art world went crazy trying to find you. And now you know where I ended up. Hiding in the middle of nowhere, fixing flooded basements and being terrorized by roosters." Cordelia sat down hard on an overturned crate, processing this information. "So when you said people pay ridiculous money for your paintings, my last piece sold for $1.2 million, 3 weeks before I found Marina in bed with Gregory Ashworth." "Jesus." "Yeah." He sat down across from her, suddenly looking exhausted. "So there you have it, the grumpy hermit's tragic backstory. Feel free to run screaming back to civilization now." Instead, Cordelia leaned forward. "Are you still painting?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What? Are you still painting? Because if you're not, that's the real tragedy here." No. I haven't touched a brush since I left New York." "Why not?" "Because what's the point? The art world is corrupt, the critics are bought, and the whole system is designed to chew up genuine creativity and spit out whatever sells. So paint for yourself. It's not that simple, isn't it?" Cordelia stood up, suddenly animated. "Jasper, you have a gift. A real, incredible gift that most people would kill for. You can't just throw it away because some horrible people tried to ruin it for you. You don't understand. I understand perfectly." Her voice was fierce. "I understand running away from things that hurt you. I understand hiding from expectations and disappointments and people who want to use you for their own purposes. But I also understand that at some point, you have to stop running and start living again." Jasper stared at her, and she could see something warring in his expression. "When did you get so wise, Princess?" "Probably around the time I decided to move to a farm and get life advice from a rooster." That earned her a laugh, a real one, warm and surprised. "You know," he said, standing up and offering her his hand, Harold was right about one thing. What's that? You're definitely not what anyone expected. She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet, and found herself standing closer to him than was strictly necessary. The basement was still flooded, Napoleon was still judging them from his bucket throne, and she was still technically fleeing from her old life. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Cordelia felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "Jasper?" she said softly. "Yeah? Thank you for trusting me with this. Thank you for not running away screaming. The day is young," she said, echoing his words from their first meeting. "I might still surprise you." "Something tells me," Jasper said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles where their hands were still joined. "You're going to do exactly that." Outside, thunder rumbled again, and they both looked up at the ceiling. "Please tell me that's not another storm coming," Cordelia said. "Okay, I won't tell you that." "Fantastic. Well, at least this time we know where the candles are." Jasper's grin was the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him. "Princess," he said, "I think this is going to be a very interesting friendship." Friendship, Cordelia thought, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped when he smiled at her like that. Right. That's definitely what this is. There are moments in life when everything you've carefully built comes crashing down around your ears, usually involving an unexpected phone call, a designer-clad woman with a vendetta, and the horrible realization that running away doesn't actually make your problems disappear. It just gives them time to get angrier and find better shoes. 2 weeks after the Great Basement Flood, Cordelia had settled into a rhythm at Pembridge Farm that felt surprisingly natural. Her days began with Napoleon's dawn serenade, included increasingly frequent consultations with Jasper about various farm emergencies, most of which she was beginning to suspect he invented, and ended with the kind of deep, satisfied exhaustion she'd never experienced in her old life. She was in the garden, attempting to convince a tomato plant that it actually wanted to grow when her phone rang. "Cordelia, darling." Vivian's voice was so artificially sweet it could have caused diabetes. "How's your little adventure going?" Cordelia sat back on her heels, immediately suspicious. Vivian never called to chat, and she certainly never sounded cheerful about the farm. "It's going well, Vivian. Really well, actually." "Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, because I have the most wonderful news. Reginald Whitfield is back from his European tour, and he's been asking about you constantly. Constantly, darling." "That's nice?" Cordelia had learned that non-committal responses were safest with Vivian. "Well, here's the exciting part. He wants to come visit you. Isn't that romantic? A handsome man traveling all that way to see you in your rustic little hideaway." Every alarm bell in Cordelia's head started clanging at once. "Visit? Here? Tomorrow. He's driving up with some friends for a long weekend. Won't that be lovely? You can show him around your farm, and he can see how charmingly pastoral you've become." The way Vivian said pastoral made it sound like a communicable disease. "Vivian, no. Absolutely not. I don't want—" "Oh, darling, I'm afraid it's already arranged." He's so excited. "And honestly, this little sabbatical of yours has gone on long enough, don't you think? It's time to come back to reality." The line went dead, leaving Cordelia staring at her phone in horror. "Problems?" Jasper's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him leaning against the garden gate with that expression that meant he'd heard enough to be concerned. "My stepmother has decided to end my sabbatical by sending my supposed Prince Charming to drag me back to civilization." Supposed Prince Charming? Reginald Whitfield. Harvard graduate, trust fund baby, and approximately as interesting as watching paint dry in slow motion. She stood up, brushing dirt off her knees. "Vivian's been trying to marry me off to him since I was 23. Something dangerous flickered in Jasper's eyes. "And you don't want to marry him?" "I'd rather marry Napoleon. The rooster has better conversation skills, I'm guessing." "The rooster has better everything skills." Cordelia ran her hands through her hair, probably leaving streaks of garden dirt. "But that's not the point. The point is they're coming here tomorrow to my sanctuary to drag me back to a life I never wanted in the first place. So don't let them. It's not that simple, Jasper. You don't know Vivian. She's like a force of nature in designer shoes. She'll take one look at this place, declare it uninhabitable, and have me packed and loaded into Reginald's BMW before lunch. Jasper was quiet for a moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse skip. What if she couldn't? What do you mean? What if you had a reason to stay that she couldn't argue with? Before Cordelia could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching cars filled the air. Multiple cars moving fast and coming up the farm road. They're not supposed to be here until tomorrow, Cordelia said. But even as the words left her mouth, she could see the convoy of expensive vehicles kicking up dust clouds in the distance. That's not your stepmother's people, Jasper said, and his voice had gone very quiet and very dangerous. The first car, a sleek black SUV, pulled up in front of the house, followed by two more identical vehicles. Car doors slammed, and suddenly the peaceful farm was swarming with people in expensive clothes carrying expensive cameras. Oh, hell, Jasper breathed. What? Who are they? But Jasper was already backing away from the gate, his face gone pale. I have to go. Wait, what's happening? Jasper. Too late. He was already striding across the meadow toward his workshop, moving with the urgency of a man fleeing a natural disaster. That's when Cordelia saw her. Marina Ashworth stepped out of the lead SUV like she was walking a red carpet, all flowing dark hair and perfectly applied lipstick. She was exactly as beautiful as the magazine photos had suggested, and she was scanning the farm with the predatory interest of a shark who'd found blood in the water. Excuse me, Marina called out, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from never being told no. I'm looking for Jasper McBride. I know he's here. Cordelia felt something protective and fierce rise in her chest. I'm sorry, who's asking? Marina Ashworth. She said the name like it should mean something, which, unfortunately, it did. And you are? The farm manager. Marina's gaze swept over Cordelia's dirt-stained clothes and garden-disheveled hair, with the kind of dismissive assessment that could wither flowers. How quaint. Well, farm manager, I need to speak with Jasper immediately. It's a matter of considerable financial importance. He's not available. I think you'll find that he will make himself available when he learns that his paintings are about to be auctioned without his consent. Something about unpaid debts and breach of contract. Marina's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Unless, of course, he'd prefer to discuss this in court. Cordelia's mind raced. This was exactly the kind of situation Jasper had been hiding from, the reason he'd fled to the middle of nowhere in the first place. And now, it had found him anyway. I'll give him the message, she said carefully. Oh, you'll do more than that. Marina stepped closer, and Cordelia caught the scent of expensive perfume, and even more expensive malice. You see, I know all about Jasper's little hideaway here, his pathetic attempt to play farmer. And I know all about you too, Miss Rosewood. The use of her real name hit like a physical blow. That's right, Marina continued, clearly enjoying Cordelia's shock. Did you really think you could disappear without anyone noticing? Your stepmother is quite worried about you. She's been very helpful in providing information about your location. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Vivian hadn't just been sending Reginald for a romantic visit. She'd been coordinating with Marina, probably seeing an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, get Cordelia away from the farm and help Marina track down the famous artist who'd vanished. Now then, Marina said, her voice taking on a business-like tone, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get Jasper. We're going to have a civilized conversation about his responsibilities, and then you're going to pack your little bags and go home where you belong. Everyone wins. And if I don't? Marina's smile widened. Then things get very unpleasant very quickly. For both of you. It was at that moment that Napoleon chose to make his entrance, strutting around the corner of the house with his chest puffed out and his beady eyes fixed on Marina's designer shoes like they'd personally offended his ancestors. Marina took one look at the approaching rooster and let out a shriek that could have shattered windows. What is that? That, Cordelia said, suddenly feeling much more confident, is Napoleon. And I think you're standing in his territory." Napoleon, as if sensing that this woman represented a threat to his peaceful kingdom, let out a battle cry that would have made his namesake proud and charged directly at Marina's ankles. The art world's most feared gallery owner fled toward her SUV, screaming about feral poultry and unsanitary conditions, while her entourage scattered like well-dressed confetti. In the chaos, Cordelia saw Jasper emerge from his workshop, drawn by the commotion. Their eyes met across the farmyard, and in that moment she saw everything: his fear, his anger, his resignation, and underneath it all, something that looked heartbreakingly like hope. "Well?" she called to him over Marina's continued shrieking. "I guess our peaceful morning is officially over." "Princess," he called back, starting toward her, "I think it's time we talked strategy. They say the best battle plans involve knowing your enemy, choosing your ground, and having excellent backup. What they don't tell you is that sometimes your backup is a territorial rooster, your ground is a rickety farmhouse, and your enemy is wearing Louboutin heels. But when you're fighting for love, even if you haven't admitted it's love yet, you work with what you've got." 20 minutes after Marina's retreat to her SUV, where she was presumably checking her ankles for rooster-related injuries, Cordelia found herself sitting across from Jasper at her kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the kind of tense silence that usually preceded either explosions or epiphanies. "So," she said finally, "on a scale of 1 to completely screwed, where exactly do we stand?" Jasper dragged his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as his signature move when the world was falling apart. Marina wasn't bluffing about the legal issues. When I left New York, there were complications. Contracts I broke, exhibitions I walked out on, people who lost money because of my dramatic exit. "How much money are we talking about?" "Enough to make this farm look like pocket change." "And the paintings she mentioned?" "Pieces I created before everything went to hell. Marina convinced me to sign some kind of exclusive agreement, said it would protect my work. Turns out it gave her gallery rights to sell anything I'd ever painted, with or without my consent." Cordelia felt anger rise in her chest like a tide. "That's theft. That's business, according to Marina." His smile was bitter. "She's been sitting on my work for 3 years, waiting for the perfect moment to cash in. Apparently, my mysterious disappearance has made my paintings worth even more. So what does she want? Me to come back, sign a new contract, paint new pieces exclusively for her gallery, basically sell my soul for enough money to pay off my debts and make everyone rich. And if you don't? She auctions everything I've ever created, keeps the profits to cover my debts, and makes sure I never work in the art world again." He met her eyes. "She's not exactly known for empty threats." Cordelia stared out the window, where Marina's convoy sat like a line of expensive vultures. In the distance, she could see more cars approaching, probably Vivian and Reginald, arriving right on schedule for this perfectly orchestrated ambush. "There's something else," Jasper said quietly. "Something I didn't tell you before." "More secrets?" But she said it gently, without accusation. "The reason Marina and I got engaged in the first place, it wasn't love. It was business. She needed an artist she could control, and I needed the connections her gallery provided. I thought I was being smart, playing their game." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out the only person I was fooling was myself." "Jasper, I was a coward, Cordelia. I let them turn my art into a commodity. Let Marina turn me into her pet project. I was so busy being successful that I forgot why I started painting in the first place." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest ache. "And why did you start painting?" "Because it was the only thing that made sense. The only thing that felt real." He looked at her then, and something shifted in his expression. "Until I came here. Until I met you." The words hung between them like a bridge neither of them was quite ready to cross. "Jasper," she began, but the sound of car doors slamming cut her off. "Cordelia, darling." Vivian's voice carried across the farmyard with the force of a foghorn. "We're here." Through the window, Cordelia watched her stepmother emerge from a pristine white sedan, followed by a tall, impeccably dressed man who could only be Reginald Whitfield. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a catalog-perfect way with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "The cavalry has arrived," Cordelia muttered. "More like the second wave of attack," Jasper said grimly. "So what do we do?" Jasper was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse skip. "We could run. I have money saved, enough to disappear properly this time. We could be in Canada by nightfall." "We? I'm not leaving you to face this alone, Princess." The casual way he included her in his escape plans made something warm and dangerous unfurl in her chest. But even as part of her thrilled at the idea of running away with him, another part, the part that had been growing stronger every day she'd spent on this farm, rebelled against the idea of fleeing again. "No," she said firmly. "No. No running. I'm tired of running, Jasper. I ran from my old life, you ran from yours, and look where it got us, cornered in a kitchen, while our past catch up with us anyway. So what are you suggesting?" Cordelia stood up, pacing to the window where she could see both camps of their enemies gathering like storm clouds. "I'm suggesting we fight." "Fight? Cordelia, these people have lawyers, and money, and we have something they don't." "Which is?" She turned back to him, and for the first time since the SUVs had arrived, she smiled. "We have the truth, and we have each other, and we have Napoleon." "Napoleon?" "Jasper, Marina is here because she thinks she can bully you into submission. Vivian is here because she thinks she can drag me back to a life I never chose. But they're both forgetting one very important thing." "What's that?" "This is our home now, our territory. And we're not the same people who ran away 3 years ago." She moved toward him, feeling more certain with every step. "You're not a coward, Jasper McBride. You're an artist who refused to compromise his integrity. And I'm not a spoiled princess. I'm a woman who chose her own path." Something blazed to life in his eyes. "And what path is that exactly?" "The one that leads right here. To this farm, to this life, to—" She stopped, suddenly aware of what she'd been about to say. "To what, Cordelia?" "To you," she whispered, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff and growing wings at the same time. Jasper stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. In 2 strides he was in front of her, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that made her heart stutter. "Say that again." "To you," she repeated, stronger this time. "My path leads to you, Jasper. It always has. From the moment you threatened to give me 3 days, and I decided to prove you wrong." "Cordelia, A sharp knock on the front door interrupted whatever he'd been about to say, followed by Vivian's imperious voice. "Cordelia, open this door immediately." They stared at each other, the moment suspended between them like a held breath. "Well," Cordelia said, reaching up to cover his hands with hers, "I guess it's time to find out what we're really made of." "Together? Together?" Jasper's smile was the first completely fearless expression she'd ever seen from him. "In that case, Princess, let's go show them what happens when they mess with our home." "Our home," she repeated, loving the sound of it. "I like that." "Good," he said, leaning down to press his forehead against hers. "Because I'm planning on it being true for a very long time." Another knock, more insistent this time. "Cordelia, I know you're in there." "Coming, Vivian," Cordelia called back, then looked up at Jasper with eyes that sparkled with mischief and determination in equal measure. "Ready to meet our adoring public?" "With you? I'm ready for anything." And hand in hand they walked toward the front door, and whatever battle waited on the other side. Some battles are won with swords, some with words, and some with the perfect combination of righteous fury, legal loopholes, and a rooster with impeccable timing. But the best victories happen when you realize you're not just fighting against something, you're fighting for the life you've chosen to build with the person you can't imagine living without. The scene on Cordelia's front porch looked like a summit meeting between 2 warring nations, if warring nations wore designer clothes and settled their disputes with passive-aggressive commentary. Marina stood flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, lawyers clearly, while Vivian had positioned herself next to Reginald like they were presenting a united front. The tension was so thick, It could have been cut with Napoleon's beak. Cordelia, Vivian began in her most patronizing tone. We need to discuss this ridiculous situation immediately. I agree, Cordelia said calmly, not releasing Jasper's hand. It is ridiculous. What took you so long to get here? Vivian blinked, clearly thrown by the response. Excuse me? Well, if you're going to ambush someone, timing is everything. You're at least 3 hours late. Marina stepped forward with that predatory smile. How amusing. But we're not here for your little comedy routine, Jasper. We're here to discuss your return to civilization and your obligations. My only obligation, Jasper said evenly, is to the truth, which is something you've never been particularly interested in. The truth? Marina laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The truth is that you owe several galleries a substantial amount of money. You broke multiple contracts, and your disappearing act has caused considerable financial damage. My lawyers have everything documented. Speaking of documentation, Cordelia said sweetly, pulling out her phone. That's interesting. Because according to the recording I just made of your conversation 20 minutes ago, you admitted to selling Jasper's paintings without his consent and falsifying the terms of his original contracts. The silence that followed was so complete that even Napoleon, who had been strutting around the yard, stopped to listen. You were recording us? Marina's voice had gone dangerously quiet. You were threatening us, Cordelia replied. In my experience, bullies tend to be much more reasonable when they know their words might come back to haunt them. One of Marina's lawyers leaned over to whisper something urgent in her ear. Her face went progressively paler as he spoke. That recording won't hold up in court, she said finally, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Maybe not, Jasper said, stepping forward. But it will hold up in the press. And in the art world, reputation is everything, isn't it, Marina? You wouldn't dare. Try me. Reginald, who had been standing in bewildered silence, finally spoke up. I'm sorry, but what exactly is happening here? Vivian said Cordelia needed rescuing from some kind of situation. The situation, Cordelia said, turning to face him with a smile that was all teeth, is that I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do, with exactly who I want to be with. Sorry, Reginald, but you've wasted a trip. But surely you can't prefer this rustic isolation to what I can offer you, Reginald protested, gesturing vaguely at the farm. I have a penthouse in Manhattan, a house in the Hamptons, connections to what? A life I never chose? People I don't care about? Reginald, you're a perfectly nice man, but you're not my perfectly nice man. Then who is? Vivian demanded, her voice reaching decibel levels that probably disturbed wildlife 3 counties over. Cordelia looked up at Jasper, who was watching her with an expression of wonder and something deeper, warmer, infinitely more precious. He is, she said simply, and felt Jasper's hand tighten around hers. Him? Vivian's voice cracked like a whip. A hermit? A nobody? A man with no prospects, no connections, no... A man, Jasper interrupted quietly, who happens to be worth approximately $50 million based on current market valuations of his existing work. The silence this time was deafening. 50 million. Reginald's voice had gone up an octave. Give or take, Jasper said casually. It's hard to keep track when you're not paying attention to such things. Marina's lawyer whispered something else urgent. Marina's face went from pale to green. You see, Cordelia continued conversationally, Jasper McBride isn't just any hermit. He's one of the most celebrated artists of his generation, and unlike some people, he has integrity. Which brings us back to the original problem, Marina said desperately. The contracts, the debts, were based on fraudulent agreements, Jasper said calmly. Which my lawyers, yes, Marina, I have lawyers too, have been quietly unraveling for the past 6 months. Turns out when you actually read the fine print instead of trusting someone you love, you discover all sorts of interesting loopholes. You've been planning this, Marina breathed. I've been healing, Jasper corrected, and learning, and painting again, actually. Some of my best work. He glanced down at Cordelia. I had inspiration. So let me make this simple for everyone, Cordelia announced, stepping forward with the authority of a woman who had finally, completely, found her voice. Vivian, I'm not coming home, ever. I'm an adult and this is my choice. Reginald, you seem like a nice person, but we want completely different things from life. I suggest you find someone who actually wants penthouse parties and social connections. She turned to Marina with a smile that could have frozen lava. And Marina, you have exactly 60 seconds to get off my property before I release that recording to every art journalist, blogger, and social media influencer I can find. Oh, and before Napoleon decides he doesn't like your shoes again. As if summoned by his name, Napoleon appeared around the corner of the house, fixed Marina with his most judgmental stare, and let out a crow that sounded distinctly threatening. The retreat was swift and complete. Within 10 minutes, both SUVs and the white sedan had disappeared down the dirt road, leaving behind nothing but dust clouds and the kind of silence that felt like victory. Cordelia and Jasper stood on the porch, hands still joined, watching their enemies flee. So, Jasper said finally, that was invigorating. That was terrifying, Cordelia corrected, but also kind of amazing. You were amazing. That thing with the recording actually wasn't a recording, my phone was off. Jasper stared at her. You bluffed Marina Ashworth? I bluffed everyone. Did you see Reginald's face when you mentioned $50 million? About that, Jasper said, turning to face her fully. I wasn't exaggerating. I really am worth that much, at least on paper. Does that change anything? Cordelia pretended to consider this seriously. Well, it does mean you can probably afford to fix the sump pump properly. Cordelia. And maybe get Napoleon a proper throne instead of that bucket. Princess. Something in his tone made her look up at him, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. It changes nothing, she said softly. You could be worth 50 cents or $50 billion. You could be famous or anonymous or anything in between. All I care about is that you're here, with me, building this life we accidentally stumbled into together. Accidentally? Okay, maybe not so accidentally. Jasper's smile was radiant. In that case, Cordelia Rosewood, I have something to ask you. What? Instead of answering, he dropped to one knee right there on the sagging porch, pulling a ring from his pocket that caught the afternoon sunlight like captured fire. I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, he began, his voice rough with emotion. I know this is crazy and sudden and probably terrifying. But I also know that every morning I wake up thinking about your laugh, and every evening I fall asleep grateful that you chose to stay. You saved me, Cordelia, from myself, from my past, from a life that was killing me slowly. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing this farm, this life, this impossible man who loves you more than he ever knew was possible? Through her tears, when had she started crying? Cordelia saw their entire future spreading out before them. Mornings with terrible coffee that gradually got better. Afternoons working side by side in the garden. Evenings filled with paint-stained fingers and flower-dusted kisses. A lifetime of small adventures and quiet victories. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, yes. Obviously yes, you impossible man. The ring slid onto her finger like it had been waiting there all along. 1 year later. They say home is where the heart is, but I've learned it's more than that. Home is where you wake up excited for the day ahead, where your morning coffee tastes like possibilities and where even the roosters seem to approve of your life choices. The wedding had been small, perfect, and held right there in the farmyard under a canopy of late summer stars. Edmund had walked her down the aisle and surprised everyone by crying. Harold had officiated, with a license he'd apparently had all along, and Napoleon had served as ring-bearer, with minimal property damage. Vivian had not attended, but she'd sent a gift, a crystal vase with a note that read, "For when you come to your senses." Cordelia had planted wildflowers in it and put it on the kitchen windowsill. Now, 12 months later, Cordelia stood in what had once been a spare bedroom and was now Jasper's studio. watching her husband put the finishing touches on his latest painting. The walls were covered with canvases, landscapes of their farm, portraits of her laughing in the garden, abstract pieces that captured the feeling of finding home in unexpected places. "What do you think?" he asked, stepping back from the easel. The painting showed the two of them on their wedding day, but it wasn't a traditional portrait. Instead, he'd captured the moment right after the ceremony, when she'd kicked off her heels to chase Napoleon away from the cake. She was laughing, dress hiked up, barefoot in the grass, while he watched her with an expression of absolute adoration. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. "It's us." "It's us," he agreed, wrapping his paint-stained hands around her waist. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. McBride." "Happy anniversary, Mr. McBride." Outside, Napoleon crowed his approval of another day in paradise, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of laughter mixed with the whisper of wind through the wheat fields they'd planted together. Home, Cordelia thought as Jasper spun her around the studio, wasn't just a place. It was this: paint in his hair, dirt under her nails, and a future full of mornings they'd wake up grateful to share. It was perfect.